Every year in the UK, 17,000 people have to have gastrostomy operations, and in the US it's almost 200,000. By default, automatically, all these medically vulnerable people are told by medical professionals to feed themselves exclusively on lab-produced commercial formula, a mix made up of over 50% Maltodextrin and a mix of hard-to-absorb synthetic vitamins and artificial minerals. How have we got to a place where conscientious, highly trained medical professionals are prescribing this stuff when there is a cheaper, healthier and more natural alternative? Welcome to Best Fed Kid. The process goes something like this. For one of many reasons, it is decided that it is unsafe for someone to be fed orally. If it looks like it will be for less than about 6 weeks, a nasogastric tube is fitted. If longer, they will think about putting in a gastrostomy direct to the stomach. Once it's in, dietitians will automatically grab one of these bags, hook it up to a tube and a pump and start mainlining it into the gut. What that stuff is almost never discussed. It certainly wasn't with us, nor was any other feeding option. And this is true for virtually all families around the world. The fact that this happens so automatically and quickly makes most parents just accept it. No alternatives are mentioned. For us and for most families, it's only later, when digestive problems start, or your kid's growth chart just refuses to follow centile lines, or you start to get sick of the weird sort of rancid margarine-y smell you get every time you connect a bag to the pump, or one of the many other issues caused by commercial formula start to show themselves that most parents, like we did, start to question what is actually in this formula stuff, and you first hear whispers of an alternative that solves these problems. It is now uncontested scientific fact that a lot of the ingredients in formula are not good for you, especially maltodextrin. My son has had his peg 9 years now, and I've racked my brain every day for an explanation of how or why the highly trained people employed by the National Health Service to look after my son's diet when he was facing a huge number of health issues for which he needed to be as healthy as possible could recommend feeding him exclusively on this highly processed and synthetic formula that caused a huge number of problems. I'm only working it out now. To begin to understand why, we have to look at the history of enteral feeding. Starting with the ancient Egyptian pharaohs pumping wine up their bums, rectal feeding was the most popular method for centuries. Jellies, milk and raw eggs were fed into people's backsides, and unsurprisingly it didn't work very well. The first gastrostomies were put in maybe the 12th century, but rectal feeding was still the way to go. This all came to a head when 2 US presidents were shot. Garfield in 1882, kept alive for 79 days on a rectal diet of minced beef and pancreas, and McKinley, shot in 1910, who was anally fed beef and whiskey until he gave out 8 days later. Soon after, rubber tubes were developed to allow nasogastric feeding through the nose and orogastric feeding through the mouth. Milks, eggs, sugar and butter began to be fed. And then, in the 1940s, with better nutritional knowledge, cod liver oil and vitamin C were added. At this point, anyone who can't eat is on a blended diet of real food. Hospitals are blending up batches of real food, people are doing it at home. But then in 1954 in Detroit, the first commercial formula was developed, and looks a lot like what is still used today, though with milk as the primary ingredient, maltodextrin a bit further down the list, and the synthetic vitamins and minerals at the end. In the 1960s, 2 things changed. First, hospitals started to worry more about everything being antiseptic, and second, technology started to be seen as good for its own sake, as in, if it's modern, it's automatically better. And then in 1967, a New York surgeon called Frank Butler wrote this in a peer-reviewed paper about formula, or what he called precision food. Food is really physiological medicine and should be dispensed with fastidious prescription. Such perspicacity and selection of our metabolic fuel can only result in an increased efficiency of the intricate human mechanism. I could predict that such efficacious physiology would add longevity. In retrospect, therefore, I am impressed by the possibility that were one to live exclusively on the precision diet, he could extend his lifespan to 150 years. This idea that a scientifically designed lab-created food is better for the body than real food was taking over everywhere. At the same time, baby formula was being promoted as far better for babies than breast milk, an idea that is now generally debunked. At the same time, man was about to go to the moon, and the idea that science could solve all problems was really seductive. The Jetsons was a cultural phenomenon in the mid-60s, showcasing the idea of a utopian technological future in which food was a robot-produced nutritional lump. Butler believed that everyone, not just tubies, will soon be on his precision diet, writing that, ironically, a man will insist on a particular gas or oil for his car, but is willing to abuse the intricate mechanism of his body for the sake of traditional social mores. He means that our attachment to the tradition of eating real food is stopping us from enjoying what is really good for us, formula. This idea that formula is like advanced engine oil for our bodies and that real food is inferior caught hold. Butler's formula, with a few tweaks, is the same stuff we have today. Only 3 years later, in 1970, a major study on formula concluded that it was nutritionally appropriate, free of significant bacterial contamination, easy to administer, of consistent viscosity and low in cost. This conclusion shows the 5 ideas that have given commercial formula the stranglehold it has today. Here they still are, right there in the British Dietetic Association's latest statement on blended diet. Here is the British Journal of Nursing repeating the same myths in 2024, with the addition of the phrase gold standard to describe commercial formula. This stuff, gold standard. Of these, 4 are totally wrong, and 1 is only superficially true. From the 1970s onwards, these formulas completely took over the enteral feeding, and the whole system was set up to promote this. Dietitian training is focused on enteral formula. In the UK, the NHS, and in America, insurers are set up to supply enteral formula. The idea of blending food for tubies was seen as fringe silliness, nutritionally poor, unhygienic, dangerous for blockages, and expensive. The market for enteral formula is now worth $8 billion a year worldwide, and is predicted to nearly double in the next decade as the population ages and medical care keeps more of us alive. So, of the 5 points that launched formula into the stratosphere in 1970 and which are still repeated by dietitians, doctors and nurses to justify their recommendation of enteral formula, which hold true in 2025? 1. That it's nutritionally appropriate. Formulas are described as complete, fulfilling all your body's needs. Nestle even calls their formula complete, with a bit of a sneaky spelling change. Other brands include scientific imagery like these swanky high-tech hexagons, or by putting health science on the bottom, emphasising its molecular attention to detail. Or, as if it were toothpaste, by writing recommended by paediatricians on the side. So, all this science and the 50-year residue of excitement about scientifically better food means that dietitians' default automatic stance is still formula is better. Dietitians still sometimes ask for food diaries as a precondition for allowing parents to start blended diet. Over the years, I've been tempted to send in the ingredients of formula to see what they say about that, or send in a list made up of truffles, caviar and lark's tongues, but always just thought in the end that life is complicated enough without winding up these people who have power over our family life. This in a world where the newspapers are always printing stories about the boy who only eats Dairy Lee sandwiches, or the lad who only eats sausages and beans, or chocolate and jam sandwiches, or chicken nuggets, or Yorkshire puddings. The nutritional standards are currently terrible in the UK. Record obesity at the same time as a new epidemic of malnutrition. So, while the nation's health craters, our dietitians are reluctant to recommend blended diet because they're worried a parent taking action to get their kid away from formula is going to neglect their kid's diet. It makes no sense. But now in 2025, we know this stuff is nutritionally far worse than even a slapdash improvised real food diet. Formula's main ingredient, over 50% of the contents of these bags, Maltodextrin, is so bad that it makes sugar look good. The scientific evidence is now just overwhelming. It creates vicious glycemic spikes and energy crashes. It destroys the good bacteria in the gut. It weakens the immune system, and it is strongly linked to type 2 diabetes and obesity. On the other hand, blending real food solves these problems. Oats, rice, sweet potato give long-lasting energy release, allowing for far better growth. Fibre in vegetables and probiotic yogurt and fermented food make the gut flourish. Protein in meat and fish boosts the immune system. And a balanced diet gives healthy weight gain and blood sugar stability. The scientific and medical evidence is all pointing in one direction, while fear and institutional stubbornness keep formula pouring into children's bodies. The pendulum of scientific thought is now clearly back towards whole foods being more nutritious. It just feels like we're waiting for healthcare to catch up. So, number 1, debunked. Butler's second point is that it is free of significant bacterial contamination. Butler's vision for a totally sterile food world and the end of food poisoning is a solution to a problem that doesn't exist, in most of the world anyway. There's a situation again and again where parents taking proactive steps to get their kids away from formula and its effects are being told to do hygiene courses before dietitians will allow them to not feed their children on formula. The food hygiene, storage and refrigeration operated by virtually all households is perfectly adequate for blended diet. Even with the storage and time management and labelling required for blended diet, kids have far fewer stomach issues than those on formula. The big University of York YourTube study showed blended diet having far better outcomes for stomach health by nearly every measure, with higher scores here meaning better outcomes. Stomach pain, discomfort, limits on how much food you can take, swallowing, comparable heartburn scores, wind, constipation, blood and diarrhea. This big American study shows the same thing across every metric. And now in 2025 we know why this is. By almost any definition, maltodextrin is toxic. It kills the good bacteria in your gut. Lots of studies have now compared the bacteria in blended diet guts with those on formula and found that blended diet has a huge positive impact on keeping your gut biome healthy. The blended diet levels, here in green, are significantly higher for almost all bacteria. The big exception is this, Akkermansia. The reason that formula gives higher levels of this bacteria is that maltodextrin attacks the gut lining. The gut compensates by producing huge amounts of mucus, which this bacteria then feeds on, creating what is known as leaky gut. This abundance of Akkermansia is evidence of the maltodextrin damaging the intestine and allowing toxins into the bloodstream. This one, Corynebacterium, flourishes where there is low diversity of bacteria, filling a vacuum of bacteria. None of this was well understood in 1967. Most of these bacteria hadn't even been discovered, and the gut-brain axis, where a healthy gut contributes to a healthy brain, was entirely unknown. In short, the last 50 years of scientific research have shown Butler to be totally wrong about the role of bacteria in food, while his ideas linger on. Point number 2, debunked. His third point is that it is easy to administer. Here, Butler and the formula people do have a point. Pulling a bag, whipping off the cap, plugging it in and pressing play is much easier than preparing food, blending it and syringing it. But there are 2 problems with this. The first is that being easy to administer extracts a high price. In the long term, kids on formula have far worse health outcomes, are more likely to be admitted to hospital, much lower growth, and the long-term cognitive effects of living mainly on maltodextrin are worse than sugar are only just being worked out. So while it may be easy to administer, in the long term it creates far more hardship. Imagine the situation reversed. You have a mouth-eating child eating a balanced diet. You are offered a supply of formula for them. You know it has worse sugar content than Nutella and can cause intestinal carnage. You know the medium and long-term health issues. Would anyone take this deal? Of course not. So why emphasize ease of delivery? The second problem is psychological. Lots of blended diet parents say that the act of preparing and feeding is really important to maintain a familial bond. The social act of sharing food is culturally vital. Breaking bread together, feasting, all these things are important. And feeding your kid is a basic part of parental decency. So while it may be superficially easier, in the long term, formula will only make life harder. Number 3, meh. The fourth point, consistent viscosity. This basically means that formula won't cause blockages in the peg, and by implication that blended diet will. This myth that blended diet causes blockages has been handed down from Butler through generations of dietitians. It was mentioned to us again and again when we first mooted the idea of going to blended diet, And even now, a couple of months ago, our dietitians phoned me out of the blue insisting I change our son from a right-angled extension to a straight extension so that we wouldn't have blockages. I couldn't think of a non-sarcastic or inoffensive way to say, we haven't had a blockage for 4 years, why are you trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist? Out of courtesy, I tried it, and this thing was banging against the table, tugging at his peg site, all for nothing. Again, here is the York study, showing a fractionally lower risk of blockage with formula, but with a far higher risk of stomach infection. With the right blender and a bit of experience, this is not an issue, but it is another antique stick that is still used to beat blended diet. Number 4, debunked. 5, low cost. Maybe this was true once, but now the NHS spends between £7,000 and £8,000 a year on formula for the average tubie. Meanwhile, the average family spends £2.20 a day on real food for a child, which comes to £803 a year, making blended diet 10 times cheaper day to day. Add the one-off cost of a blender, £600 for a Vitamix with the discount, and an estimated £290 on storage equipment, which does seem a bit high to me, and you are still saving the NHS at least £6,000 a year. Taking into account that kids on blended diet require much less hospital attention, and the economic case for blended diet is as strong as the nutritional one. In fact, given the way all the data is pointing, you could go further and say that it would be in the NHS's interests, both in terms of health and cost benefit, to provide tubie families with a powerful blender, and in a world where processed foods are so much cheaper than natural ones, budget to ensure proper food goes into that blender. Point 5, debunked. All 5 of Butler's claims, cast in dietitian stone and repeated over and over for half a century, are flawed, yet here they are repeated by the 2 UK bodies most influential in decisions about gastrostomy nutrition. Part of me feels angry about this, but another part sympathetic towards health professionals. Asking a dietitian to recommend formula is like asking an English teacher to burn a pile of books, or a chef to serve a plate of Spam and Wotsits. If all the arguments for formula are invalid, there can be no good reason that formula is the default automatic choice for people with gastrostomies. As in, the default should be this. Once you get a gastrostomy, the assumption is that you go on to blended diet as soon as possible, and you need a good reason to feed formula rather than the reverse. It's bewildering to me that vulnerable kids are railroaded straight onto this. If all the energy that goes into questioning parents about blended diet could go on supporting the transition to real food, the outcomes for everyone, tubies, parents, health professionals and the NHS would be spectacular. If you're a seasoned blender and you've got a tip for me, or if you're thinking about blended diet and have a question, please leave a comment below. Happy